And Ines, I think you are with us, and we'll join. Yes, there you are. Can you turn your microphone back on? There we go. No, you're still muted. Yes, go.
Hello everybody. And sorry, I need to admit someone. Thank you very much for this this wonderful event. I am an artist, and my name is, as it is there, Inês Amado. I'm living in Portugal at the moment due to COVID-19, and I am actually living by the river on the south side of the river and estuary, the Tagus. So anyway, I decided to do something not around the Tagus, but in a way around the Tagus and around every single river and every single ocean, because we are all interconnected. So I've created something around listening deeply, memory, and also some kind of sensorium and connectivity. So if you could put the sounds and the image on, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. I was born in a village very near the sea, only 2 miles from it. In winter, I could hear its roaring. Its vibration was then part of my own breathing. In summer, it's murmuring. As a child, I spent my holidays in the little fishing village itself. And every so often, I would be going with some, normally 6, fishermen in their large rowing boat to do some fishing. Sometimes during high tides, the waves were massive and would get me completely wet. I'd be trembling, shaking with cold, but especially fright. Nevertheless, I would soon forget about the high tide and the enormous waves, and if invited, I would join my friends, the fishermen, time and time again. Among the fishermen, there was one who was blind. This blind man was someone I was in awe of. To my childhood eyes, he was more than awesome. And to this day, I believe he was truly special. He was the person responsible for calling all the fishermen to go fishing, according to how the weather and the conditions of the sea were and would be. In his total blindness, he would sense whether the sea would be calm enough or would actually turn turbulent and impossible to navigate in 3 or even 5 hours' time. He knew by heart all the high and low tides all year round. It was as if his body was an extension of the sea itself. He was the oldest of the fishermen, and he was full of wisdom. His posture, even though covered in tattered clothes, with trousers rolled up to his thighs, he commanded respect. His name was Joaquim, but everyone called him Tijequim. He had a beautiful conch. By blowing it, he would call all his friends the fishermen. The sound of his conch still resonates inside of me. That special and quite unique sound would fill me with wonder. It was so very magical. In its tones, I could hear the sea in all its different sounds, calm and rough. I could sense mermaids singing and waves breaking, foaming and splashing. Tijekin was my hero. In his blindness, he had the gift of knowing. In his hands, he had the capability of giving a conch the most amazing sounds. With his powerful arms, he could row the boat and from time to time, lift me up into the sky. Tijekin was respected and trusted by all. In all his years of calling others to join him by blowing his conch, he never had one single time when he wasn't right. Many years have gone by. Tijekin died in the late 70s. I hadn't heard the sound of a conch for many decades. Then, in 2015, I was invited to go to Norway to do a workshop around deep listening with Pauline Oliveros. It was a great privilege being at the Arctic Circle doing the L with the woman who created it and their wonderful colleagues and partners, Carol Lyon and Eloise Gold. On the very first morning I was there at 5:30, I woke up with this incredible sound. I could recognize a mile away, but no, this sound wasn't a mile away. This sound was coming as clear as days and nights were in this deep listening midnight sun event. And somehow, this sound reverberated through the stairwell all the way up to the first floor into my bedroom and through my body into my soul. I, still in my pajamas, just had to run downstairs to see who was taking me all the way to my little fishing village and reconnecting me with Tijekin. Of course, it was none other than wonderful Pauline Oliveros with a conch, waking us up for the start of the first day of the workshop, and which was then a ritual performed every other morning. Pauline's conch was just like the one my wonderful fisherman friend of yesteryear used to play. I had tears in my eyes. I was once again the little girl of 6 or 7, and the smell and the calling of the sea was as present as it had been all those decades ago. What an amazing moment of connection, of grounding, reassurance, of synchronicity, and of deep listening in my life. High tides come and go. Waves may be massive, frightening even, but they also subside and give way to calmer seas. The world is going through massive tides, and waves of COVID keep coming. And even when they break in the shores of our lives, they seem to be forever coming. But in reality, these tides, with their massive waves, will eventually give way to low, passive tides, with all the oceans becoming one single ocean, calm in its immensely harmonious togetherness and total interconnectedness. And if we listen deeply, we will be able to listen to Pauline's conch as well as Tijekin's, and we will then allow our bodies to vibrate and revibrate from within in deep unity and oneness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ines. That was beautiful. And it's funny when when I saw your conch the first time when you were talking about making beautiful sounds with the conch, I was thinking of Pauline. And there you are mentioning Pauline. She was a good friend.
She was a good friend of mine as well. A beautiful, wonderful artist and human being, wonderful human being.
Well, thank you for that lovely text. We must move on because we're slightly over time, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And Carolyn, there you are. Boom. Yes, very efficient. Lovely to see you. I just need to make you a co-host so that you can share your screen.
Oh, am I sharing it or are you sharing the film?
Well, actually, we're sharing it, but
Oh, you
just in case you needed to. But yes, we are indeed sharing your movie when you're ready.
I think I have unmuted myself actually. Yeah.
You are. Yes, you have. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't going to show the film yet, Richard.
Hold
But we
on.
will.
Sorry.
Could you just pause it for a second, please? I just wanted to give a bit of background, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, so I live in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire on the, I always get muddled up, on the west side of the River Severn, and I lived on the east side for many, many years. So I've kind of got this river's always been in my life in some way or another. I returned to practice in earnest, although I've got an MA dating back from the 90s, but I've been curating a lot. So 2017, I started drawing both sides of the river. And then I put those together in a book, which Art Dotter published for me, which is great. And since then, I've kind of moving through lots of different mediums. So I've been using drawing quite a lot and charcoal, and then I started returned to some printmaking. I've always done video films, I've been making films. And it's actually this time last year on the spring tide, I made a real special film for me actually. During the lockdown, we have the Severn Bore here, which I'm sure you all know about, that comes up the river, and it actually starts at the bottom of my street. So the surfers all know I film, and they told me that nobody would be surfing the Bore this time last year. So I took the opportunity to get out there and get fantastic sound recordings without them all going whoop, 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 helicopters above and everything. So I made a film with that called When You Call, I Shall Come, which obviously was very emotional as well. It was the beginning of the pandemic. And that really took off. So I've carried on doing more filmmaking, and I'm going to show you my most recent one in a minute. I just want to say a quick word about the mud, because the mud's become a recent passage for me. I've been filming the water for a long time, looking at both sides, but I started really getting excited about the contrast between the stone and the mud and the different conditions of the high tides and the low tide. So now my high tides are spent filming and my low tides are on my hands and knees. And I've started only 5 days, I've just realized I got some of that graphite putty, and I went out and I'm going to show you the actual thing. And I went out and did this. Can you see that? So I don't know whether you can see very well, but it's kind of a bit like the LiDAR you were talking about. The surface of the paper, I've pressed really, it was about sensing. So I used my right hand to press down onto the paper, onto the stones and guide, and I'm left-handed, and then I'd rub with the left. So it's kind of this two-way thing. So I'm really excited about that. But I'm here to talk about the film. So the Dredger film, it's filmed down at Lydney Harbour. I'm actually a consultant there on the Public Art Commission, so been very lucky to have some contacts through that. So I've got lots of information from the Environment Agency, and they let me know when the dredger was coming in. The dredger can only operate when the tides are on the way in, and the river's so fast in and out here. There's only 3 hours turnaround, and it's a massive, it's a really important harbour. It was industrially. So the dredgers can only work for 3 hours at high tides. So really limited time, and then the rest of the time they can't work. So I took a series of footage of them, and I just think they're very poetic. I decided not to narrate them. I narrated them, and then I didn't, and then I did poetry and I didn't. And I think I'd like to see what you think of it when you've seen it. So now, Richard, I'm ready.
But beautiful film. It's lots of comments in the chat for you, Carolyn. So lots of feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
I think a lot of, I think, you know, you asked about the question of narrative or poetry, and I think there's a strong consensus from the comments I've seen that the combination of the live sound and the music works exceptionally well, particularly that rhythmic pulse that's coming off the.
Yeah, that was a deliberate decision actually between the composer and myself, because we felt the movement was so smooth, it needed something, a mechanical heartbeat, basically.
Yeah.
And once we cracked that, because it took quite a while to get there, then we were completely off. And I was just saying, I've been filming yesterday, today and tomorrow, the High Tides this year. And I'm going to make a similar film to the one I made a year ago, but with a very different emotional aspect to it.
Wonderful, thank you. Is anyone, we've got just sort of a minute before we come into the next. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say to Carolyn?
Richard, I wanted to just pick up on the question that was from Julie, just about have the people who have seen it that are in it part of it, that it's their lives.
Yeah, sorry, I thought that was a really good question. Yes, I'm in fact tomorrow the Severn Estuary Partnership, which is the kind of massive organisation of industries and education establishments and fishermen, anybody to do with the Severn. They're actually featuring it in their newsletter tomorrow, and I will certainly get hold of. I did actually meet the blokes who drove the dredger. They invited me to go on with them actually, but that morning I went when it was really, really stormy. It was just way too dangerous. It was really slippery. We weren't even sure whether the boat was going to get out, and I'm scared of heights, so there's no way I was going to climb down a ladder on the docks and get on the dredger with them. But they've all been amazing. And environmentally, I should just mention the environmental side. I also spoke to the Environment Agency and I said, is there anything alive in there? I didn't say it hasn't been dredged for 20 years. And she said, no, we did all of the environmental tests and we found a few lugworm casts, but you know, if you think the amount of mud over 20 years, accrued mud. And I did feel in my narrated version, I was feeling really sad by the end of editing. I just kept thinking, what's this going to be like in 20 years? Is global warming going to have flooded the place? You know, what's going to happen in that time gap between this dredge and the next, you know? So, yeah.
Great, thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Great, so we're going to move on now to Tina Hitchens and Sam Francis. If we could spotlight both of them together, that would be fantastic. Great, over to you.
Hi.
Hi.
Are you there, Sam?
I am, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
Great. Right.
Should I do a bit of an intro?
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about a film that will show in shortly that's called High Tide, that Sam and I made last year. So it was made as a commission from the British Music Collection and Sound and Music. They put out some commissions that they called Interpreting Isolation quite early on. When did they put them out, Sam? April last year?
Yeah, I'd say so.
As a bit of a response to COVID, bit of funding. So yeah. It sort of the idea came out of, I think we'd both been Sam lives in Weston and I live in Bristol. I think early lockdown, we've both been independently walking to water sources. Obviously for Sam, that's a bit easier to get to the sea. For me, it's more like rivers. But I think independently, that had felt really important immediately, to get out and go for walks. And I think we were in touch about that, but then the commission came up. And yeah, I think particularly we were interested in the metaphor of water and how that was kind of keeping things feeling connected despite being stuck at home, and that sense of motion and flow that was actually really reassuring, at a time where it didn't really feel like much else was in motion or flowing. So yeah, I don't know, I don't want to witter too much. Sam, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll talk a bit about the process, and how we sort of went about it, because that sort of felt really important, actually, didn't it? That sort of, you mentioned the sort of metaphor of water. I think it sort of ended up being this quite sort of interesting sort of exchange and collaboration, in that it was sort of really active and felt actually really like a lifeline as well, at a time that was like really quite difficult. I live on my own, and I was quite new to Weston, so I felt really isolated. So, you know, going to the sea every day and doing these sort of long walks was like, you know, a lifeline, really. And so when Tina and I sort of started sort of talking around ideas of the sea and the connection between the sea and Weston, and how that eventually sort of joins up with Bristol in some respects, down the estuary, we were sort of really keen to sort of, you know, sort of almost like imagining like a journey from one place to another almost. And so we were like, well, what is it in this that we can kind of explore, for this commission? And it just sort of made sense to sort of visit the high tide. So yeah, over a period of about 2 weeks, we sort of met at high tide. And when we say met, we would sort of go to our respective sort of water sources and video call each other, and just sort of show each other the sort of surroundings and where we were. And then we would go off for a sort of walk for about an hour, with a focus of just really trying to sort of tune into our environments and to sort of zoom in, to the water and our surroundings, and start to sort of gather material. So we both sort of went out with sound recorders and video recorders and notepads, and just started to sort of like just really get into like much more sort of detail into our surroundings. So yeah, it did sort of become like a sort of meditative process a little bit, in a way. And then we would sort of meet up again on our phones afterwards and talk about our experiences. So that was like one of the days of many days.
Yeah, there was definitely something quite reassuring and grounding about it, like you said, that sort of meditative element to it that was kind of yeah, I mean, it was really natural anyway that we all suddenly became super aware of our environments around us at that time anyway. But yeah, as a process, yeah, I think it was as much about connection between us, wasn't it, as well, and that kind of, and again, focusing on the sea and kind of remembering that wider connection that was quite hard to sort of recall at that moment in time. And yeah, that process that we did together, of that kind of showing each other. I think when we were arriving places, we were quite often pointing out to each other what we really liked about where we already were. And I think there was a bit of an exchange. I remember you saying at certain times, "Oh, what's that?" like in the background, and then you know, that would influence then what I captured, and vice versa. So yeah.
And it's like, because we did it over a period of a couple of weeks, it became like, you know, at a certain point it's like, oh, I feel like I've got everything, but then you know, then suddenly like, of course I haven't, there's so much more to explore, to take a different route, or you know, the weather would be different, or you know, there was all sort of slight changes in the water, in the environment, and you know, so many things.
Definitely. And you were so you wrote some words, some text as we went along, didn't you? And I think that sort of influenced what I was gathering my end probably as well. And I think that exchange of, so we sent each other material back and forth as we were sort of accumulating it. And definitely for me, that what I was getting from you influenced what I wanted to get my end, and vice versa as well. And then, yeah, I think quite usefully in the process, they wanted a minute's worth chunk before the main deadline, didn't they? So that kind of then gave us a bit of a sort of trajectory of putting it together. And then out of that, I think those sort of like the key like points that it's pinned on came up as well, like your lovely seaweed image that made me cry the first time I saw it, because it's just really beautiful. Which became a bit of a point to pin things on.
Yeah, I remember when we were talking about this earlier as well, like I was really obsessed with like capturing the sounds of some seagulls, because they're always present in Weston, and yet there was just this such like quiet stillness to Weston Beach. It was just incredible, because you know, people in the first lockdown, you know, it's so different to this one and the previous one, in that there was just no one around, and there was no litter, and there was no food, and there was no people, so there was no seagulls. So, you know, I struggled to get a recording of a seagull, which just seemed insane. Somewhere like Weston.
And also with my recording, so in being in a more built up where there were more people, actually within my audio recordings as well, accidentally sort of capturing a bit of sort of archival footage of people's mid-lockdown conversations as they went past, sort of ranting about face masks in Tesco and stuff like that, and that was kind of pretty sweet to get worked in there. But yeah, there's definitely some of the recordings are just, you know, you can even hear them passing, and yeah, it was a pretty nice process. But yeah, I think it was also that sense, I think there was that bit of like grounding and slowing down that a lot of us had to do, that was a bit of a shock to the system, and it was definitely part of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think as well, because it was all so new, really, well, it had been a few weeks or something before we started doing this, and yeah, I really valued our sort of connection, and yeah, just being able to sort of have someone to talk to on a regular basis. I mean, you know, talking to people, of course, but it was just because we were actively doing something.
At the Tide Times, yeah. And that it was sort of structured around the Tide Times made it, all the more helpful, didn't it? Definitely.
Guys, could we see your film? We've got 5 minutes left. We'd love to.
Yeah. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Sonorous water body. We distance. It flows. We flow. We step into the water, faint-hearted. Keeps moving, keep moving. Dance light with the winds. Exhale, exhale. All untethered water. We emerge, submerged, we emerge. Sliding, slipping, slipping, sliding, sliding, singing, stuttering, slamming, slamming, stuttering. To be still, to be fluid, to be water. Fade in, fade out, fade in, fade out. If we count each wave, it will soon be over. If we count each ripple, it will soon be over. Tide folds back onto itself. In, out, in, out. All untethered water. All rippling ripples. Rising, rippling, rippling, rising.
dive under the waves as sheets, delve furlongs deep, dance light with the winds, exhale. The unsung sleep, breathe in, listening, listening, breathing, breathing, listening. Fall into me, fall out of me, breathe into me, breathe out of me. I step into the water, uncharted. We step into the water, faint-hearted. All tingling digits, all slow motion jitters. It is high, it is low. We are high, we are low. Swelling, sinking, sinking, shifting. Submerged, we emerge. Submerged, we emerge. Submerged, we emerge.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. We've got 1 minute left, and I just wanted to ask, in a nutshell, could you say if that making that piece of work has impacted your work going forward from that in any way, connecting to the tides in that way?
Yeah, for me, for sure. Yeah, I want, like, definitely a lot. Yeah.
Not immediately for me, but I hope it might. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I would recommend listening to it on headphones, because it's actually a really beautiful piece of sound composition as well.
Have you got a link you could put to it where people can listen?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. We are going to move on now to Stacey Levy. Stacey, hi.
Yeah, hey, hi everyone.
Great.
Great. Okay.
Welcome.
So I'm Stacey Levy. I'm an artist who works with a lot of different water systems in the United States, but my truly favorite thing to work with is tides, particularly tidal rivers, which we have quite a number of running through Philadelphia, New York, and Washington. All the cities that were settled on the East Coast basically have a tidal river, which was a very important thing about why they were settled. I've done a number of projects on the Schuylkill River, which runs right through Philadelphia, and I'm going to show a 3.5-minute video on that, and then talk a little bit about that work and other works too, and sort of what inspired them and how they're constructed and some of the issues that come up. So Richard and Marie, if you would show the video, and then I'll switch over to screen sharing and I'll show my thing. I'm kind of a sucker for an urban river. A tidal urban river is like my favorite thing to deal with. The idea that we have this like living beast, this liquid beast that rises and falls twice a day. I love the fact that there's a bigger rhythm out there that we can observe.
trying to make a work that brings people down to meet the river, see the changes, so they might get to know it, and then they'll get to love it, and then they'll want to preserve it.
A lot of people doesn't stop and take time out to actually breathe and enjoy life. So out here, you actually get that sense of feeling.
Not that many places have tidal rivers. Philadelphia is a good hour and a half from the ocean, but that is the ocean pushing this tide up the Delaware and then up the Schuylkill. Only the fishermen know, and occasional kayakers. Tidefield gives you a way to look out on the river and to know, are we at high tide, are we at half tide, or are we at low tide? And so if you can only see the top 3 red buoys, that's high tide. And then as the tide drops to half tide, the buoy strands will start to arc in a kind of caterpillar-like arch. And then when the tide is low, they lay out like sleepy caterpillars on the water. So you get a full 3 colors at low tide and less as the tide rises. All right. I like putting my art in places where people will unexpectedly come across it. And particularly if they have a repeat visit, they'll start to see slight changes happening in the piece. The surface of the water is very animated, but we kind of lose track of that. But if you put something out there that captures that animation and amplifies it, you really see how variable the water surface is. There are micro patterns of wind blowing through, and these things are responding in a big way. I hope that people come down to the river and spend more time with nature and start to see the tide and get that feeling that I get, like, wow, nature's happening here. It's happening in my backyard. And getting the sense that I'm at home in the world.
Okay, great. Thanks. I hope that wasn't staggered as it was for me. I have rural connections. I'm not going to share my screen. And let's hope this will go. Share. You get to see my messy desktop, the artist desktop. And I'm going to, oh, this has to get off of here. And I'm going to view. So I just wanted to run you through some slides to show you sort of what I'm thinking about, because this is a tide chart here, typically how we tell the tides. We use a graph to tell this information that's very, very visceral, and we often don't have a real association with it. But I'm really interested in making the tide more visible to people, particularly people living in along these urban tidal rivers who just aren't going to see the tide. They're not going to get it. And there's no big tide chart listed above the highway as you're looking over to the river. So how do we make it more visual? And one of the projects that I'm still working on to get built is called Tide Flowers. It was for the Hudson originally. And it's a new way you can see how the flower is at open at high tide like this. And then it closes as the tide ebbs, as the tide falls. And so you get this this sort of field of flowers that are going to propose to be on these old pilings. The pilings are actually part of the issue that I have. The water's gotten cleaner, the worms have gotten more active, and they're eating the pilings, and so it's making them weaker. So that's our hitch right now. But tide flowers are supposed to be very field-like through these pile fields and on the Hudson River. Now, I got a chance to work on the Schuylkill River, which is in Philadelphia, also a tidal river, an extremely urban river as it runs through Philadelphia. So I'm trying out this flower idea again. And what's interesting is the petals need to be as long as the tidal range. And here, impressive to those of you in the south of England, but to me, that's a pretty good tide until you get up into Maine where you get a 12-foot tide. And it's only 4 foot in the Hudson River. But this idea that you can sense the tide from the land is something I'm really trying to get at. And but this flower design's problematic, needs a lot of engineering. And in this case, I didn't have the pilings to attach to, so I had to work out other methods. Then I thought, oh, maybe I'll try something along the shore where I adhere the tide indicator onto the shore and it can show the changing tide, but that wasn't going over very well. But one of the things that I really had to be aware of was how much debris comes down these rivers. This river in particular just gets a massive amount. This is a typical storm, not a hurricane, not something out of the ordinary. That's all debris backing up with boats. So I had to deal with that. So I knew I needed to make a much more streamlined system, and spheres are very forgiving. So I created this tide field that you just saw the movie with the high tide. It would indicate high tide, half tide, and low tide by which buoys were exposed. So laying flat at low tide, arching up at half tide, and then just the last 3 buoys are shown during the high tide. And there it is in a big, some of them were in bigger clusters than others. This was one of the larger clusters. And there it is again at half tide going into high tide. And it ran 2 miles along the river down at Bartram's Gardens all the way up to the Philadelphia Art Museum. So if you were on the river, you could see these, but also you could see them from bridges passing as you passed over, either walking or driving. These were, it was a very apparent way of seeing the tide as you drove through Philadelphia, which I think is really important to make that connection. Just keeping an eye on my time. So there's the half tide arched on the surface, and misty mornings, you could go out kayaking among them. It was nice. And still evenings, it was a great place to watch the river. And with this project, I created these boat-shaped rooms called river rooms, which gave people a place to fish from and a place to pause and watch the river. There are not a lot of places along this very industrial but also delightful river to actually sit and experience, to take that pause you need in order to watch the water. And in these river rooms were welcome mats of stones that talked about the moon's relationship with the tide, and how the tidal bulge works, why you get a high tide and a low tide, and the different full moons, and how you could tell if the moon was waxing or waning. One of the tricks that we discovered was if it has the curve of a P, it's waxing or plumping. That's how you remember the P. The curve of a C is composting, shrinking, or waning. And you can see this. So this moon is waxing, is going to get larger because it's curved like a P. And this is composting. That I needed a C word that meant something getting decreased and you're getting smaller, is a waning moon. So you can take that home as a way of remembering. I also did a lot of work with like day interventions, so that you could mark the tide while staying dry. There's a 6-foot tide in 6 hours, so it's going up a foot an hour, and we marked it in real time in this grid, and you would paint it as the day progressed during a festival that was at Bartram's Gardens. So we're painting it as it goes. Here's high tide. And at the end of the day, the entire tide was painted in this kind of real time, and it had been tracked. So all ages helped, which was a lot of fun. And it was a way of people, having people sense the passage of the tide. This is a project that's hopefully one day will go into on the Hudson, which shows the rising and lowering tide with these light poles. That happened right before our recession and has been put on hold forever. But one thing I have learned is tide is not an easy collaborator. It's really tricky to work with them. It's a lot of forces pulling in different directions, particularly tidal rivers. And one of the things is the amazing amount of algae, which claims all things that are put into a fairly polluted urban river. So these are the hundreds and hundreds of buoys that have come home to my barn my barn studio after spending almost a year out in the river, and they're pretty filthy, which makes you realize that this water quality is a little iffy too. So that is the end. We're just 3 minutes short. And thanks. But one thing that's very important as an artist is the idea of giving people a way to embrace the tide, to understand it so that we don't fear it. With climate crisis, everyone's saying, oh my God, the tide is going to overtake us. And this idea that the tide is against us is a very bad feeling to have out there in people's minds. So I'm trying to make the tide more comprehensible, more embraceable, so that people are happier living with it and not fearing it so much. So thank you so much. It was just really fun to be part of this program and to watch all these other tide works. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. I wanted to just ask you, it's so clear that the work is really addressing this sort of first step of noticing for people, to give them a way into observing and noticing. And we saw some people interacting with your work. Can you just, in maybe a minute or so, just talk about how people, did they interact in ways you didn't imagine, or how does that work?
What you don't always imagine is how much time people will give to looking at the surface of the water if they, I'm admitting a person here, if they have a space to watch nature, they'll spend more time watching it. So I think one of the things that I learned as an artist is I need to make those spaces for people to pause and observe. Artists are so, we just observe as a kind of second nature. But we have to give that gift to other people as an introduction to nature too, to give people a place where they can stop and watch. And the registrations that I create give you something to focus on that you might not spend the time watching and waiting unless there was a kind of candy on the water, some kind of focal point. I need that too, being slightly ADD. I need to like have a sense that I am watching something unfold. And I think making that unfolding kind of act on the surface of the water gets people to witness the water and spend more time with it.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, appreciate it.
Thank you, Stacey. And I have to say, I live in London near the River Thames, and I totally appreciate your sort of, drawing attention to the beast of the water, the body of water that's flowing through our sacred river through a big city. So thank you. That was really marvelous. Thank you.